to IEEE ICC 2018, and welcome to Kansas City. So this year, we received in total 2,431 submissions, and among which we accepted 972 papers. So the conference consists of totally 13 technical symposiums, and the accepted papers are organized into 160 technical sessions, and the 16 parallel sessions are ongoing simultaneously. And among which we have 88% papers are presented in oral sessions, and 12% papers are presented in interactive sessions. And furthermore, we have actually 17 full-day and 4 half-day workshops and 24 half-day tutorials totally for the conference. So we really appreciate all the helps and the support we received during the preparation of the conference, which makes the IEEE ICC 2018 a great success. So thank you so much. Thanks. So now it is my great honor to introduce today's first keynote speaker, Professor Elisa Bertino. So these days, network security is getting more and more important. So we are so glad and honored to have Professor Bertino here to deliver our first keynote speech, which is in the topic of security and privacy in the IoT. So Professor Bertino is the Kleiner Perkins Samuel Conte Term Professor of Computer Science, Purdue University of Electrical and Computer Engineering Department, and also the Director of CyberSpace Security Lab. She's a Fellow of IEEE, Fellow of ACM, and Fellow of American Association for the Advancement of Science and for the Science. So for her great achievements, she has received many prestigious awards. So welcome, Professor Bertino, to the stage.
First of all, good morning to everyone. I'm very excited to be at this conference, which I must say is a little bit outside the areas where I usually attend the conference for, but I'm very thrilled to see the major advances which are being kind of achieved in the area of networks, as networks are a key component for the new generations of applications, systems, including IoT. Now, IoT are very interesting because they pose really interesting and novel challenges with respect to security, and not only security, as a matter of fact. So let me start. Being a professor, sometimes I like to start with definition by providing a very high-level definition of what is an IoT system. So we can say that an IoT system consists of several IoT devices, and those are physical objects which are embedded with computer processing and communication capabilities. And that basically allows us to collect data from the environment in a very fine-grained way, and this is also due to nice advances in the area of geolocalization of devices, where now you can have a very highly precise localization of devices. But not only you can collect a lot of data from everywhere at any time, you can also control remotely those objects, which is really very interesting. So I've talked, for example, in colleagues in civil engineering, and they like the idea that when you have the infrastructures inside buildings, those can be controlled remotely. But in addition to this, we also have that some of those objects have actuation capabilities. And actuation capabilities refer to the ability of devices to change the physical space, to do actions which modify the environment. Now you can see, given this powerful capability of being remotely controlled to acquire data and to change the physical space, you can see why security and privacy are really critical, and I'll provide you some more examples. But the actuation capability also introduced the requirement to look not only at security and privacy, but also safety. And those notions, they intersect in some way, but they are different. So to give you a very simple example of the difference between security and safety, let's think about an implanted medical device. So a typical safety problem refers to make sure that the device doesn't release toxic substances which may harm the human body. That is a safety problem. A security problem means making sure that nobody can hack inside of this device and then make the device not working properly. It is obvious that if you have a security vulnerability or weaknesses in your device, this may result in a safety problem. And I will provide you later on a very nice example in the area of smart toys. Of course, when talking about IoT, security, privacy, and safety, a lot depends on the specific type of devices you are talking about, the specific application. So there is not unique IoT, and usually it's nice to distinguish at least 3 categories of IoT systems. The consumer IoT systems, those are systems deployed inside of homes, like smart lock, smart thermostat, and so forth. A very important second area is industrial IoT. This is really very exciting. It ranges from manufacturing to gas and oil industry. And finally, the other third area is the area of IoT for infrastructures. For example, SmartCity, energy infrastructure, intelligent transportation. They all will use IoT in many ways. Just to give you a very interesting example, I pulled two nice examples from a report talking about industrial IoT. By the way, industrial IoT, according to this report, is defined as the convergence of 3 technologies: sensor-driven computing, again, which those sensors can acquire a lot of data, do local computations. Then we combine it with industrial analytics, which is machine learning applied, again, to industrial processes, industrial manufacturing. But also, we see intelligent machine applications. Intelligent machines, you may think here about industrial robots, are machines which are very much autonomous. They can do load balancing local, can optimize their processes. The combination of these 3 technologies is what they refer as IoT, industrial IoT. Now, a very first interesting example is represented by Michelin, the tire manufacturer. So the idea is to embed the sensors inside of tires. And this allows them not only to do a better job in maintaining those tires, but also will represent new opportunities, new business opportunities, which we built on the collected information. Notice, however, that here both privacy and security of those data is very critical. So you don't want an attacker to tamper with the data being transmitted from the tires to some cloud. Because wrong data may result in, for example, not being aware that certain maintenance operations have to be executed. Another application which I selected is represented by agricultural equipment. Purdue is in Indiana, which is a big agricultural state, and we have a big ag college. So I work with those colleagues. And by the way, they have a lot of practical problems when trying to use wireless technologies, because they deploy a lot of sensors on the field. But classical problem they have is that the antennas of those devices bend because small animals sit on top of them. So they have all this practical problem. But what I learned, to my big surprise, is that farmers are very worried about data concerning their soil. So they say, yeah, we like this technology, but we don't want this data to be disclosed. It has to be protected a lot. So this was a surprise to me, but there are reasons why they are very so conscious about the security of their data. It's very important. Now, just to give you another example, this goes really toward what is called the maturity evolution of industrial IoT application. I will not say much, but as you can see, there are various stages according to which this technology is used. And the reason why I mention this is that depending on which stage you are, this will influence, impact the type of security solutions you need to deploy. For example, if we go at the top of this maturity model, the stage indicated as number 5, you will see that the idea is to do what was called yesterday in the first keynote, edge computing. So the idea now, you want to do a lot of computing nearby the equipment, the machines you have. And for example, for the oil and gas industry, this is particularly interesting because they have a lot of remote platforms and the computation have to happen locally. But certainly protecting now your system when you have a much more decentralized system with autonomous component is much more challenging. So let's now get into talking why is IoT posing risks and what are the new risks that they bring into our systems. At a general level, we can say that IoT expanded the attack surface. So attack surface is a very intuitive notion, so refers somehow to the points in which your system can be attacked. The larger this surface is, the more difficult is the job of protecting your system. But having said that, which are the specific risks? Why are they so difficult to protect? So first of all, IoT systems do not have a well-defined perimeters. Now, when I started working in security, which was more than 20 years ago, a lot of people will tell me, oh, you protect the networks, you put a lot of firewalls, and your system is well protected. Now, that notion, of course, proved later on not to be correct. There are various reasons, including you have insiders who do a lot of attacks, but also organizations have to collaborate a lot. So you cannot really isolate the system. Unless you have really some critical application, which is very, for example, some military or nuclear power applications, which are really critical. Usually, we are used to share data, to share applications. IoT even increases this problem. Now you have a lot of small systems, small devices. If you want to say, which is my system, you may not be able to tell exactly what your system is and which are the devices within it. And in security, we say that you cannot protect what you don't know you have. So in order to protect your system, you must know very well your system. And IoT systems pose a challenge, especially when you combine this with mobility, with wearable devices and so forth. IoT systems are highly dynamic and they evolve because of mobility. They are very heterogeneous. But there are some more important challenges. One is that IoT may include the physically unprotected portion. So the problem there is that you may have an attacker going there, tagging the device, and carrying the device with him or with her. And people in cryptography are working on what is called the white box cryptography. Many cryptographic protocols work under the assumption of black box cryptography, which means that the attacker can see the input and the output onto the cryptographic algorithm. White box cryptography instead assumes that the attacker can look at the state of the memory of the computer while the encryption is being done. So it's much difficult to do cryptography in that type of assumption. But what is very interesting also is that IoT systems may include objects not designed to be connected to the internet. This is a major problem, especially in manufacturing, because companies have a lot of equipment that now they want to connect to internet, but those devices, this equipment was not designed to be connected with the internet. I want to give you a very important example, which arises in the vehicles, in cars. At the beginning of the 80s, there was a communication protocol called Control Area CAN, which was standardized and adopted for communication within subsystems within cars. In the 80s, nobody thought that cars would be one day connected to the internet. As a result, in this protocol, messages sent by one subsystem to the other are not digitally signed. Digitally signing a message is the first basic security thing you should do. And as a result, when the cars got connected to internet, a lot of problems came up. Okay? And this is a typical example. But finally, I want to say that human interaction with the devices will not be scalable. The problem is that the devices will outnumber the number of humans in the world, and therefore managing those devices, it will be a major issue, because keep in mind that a lot of security problems arise not only because we have vulnerabilities in software, in communication protocols, but also because sometimes the security techniques are not properly configured. Now, let's look a little bit about which are the common vulnerabilities from a practical point of view that people have found. Several companies have come up with similar reports. This is quite done some years ago, but it is still valid today. Now, if you look at this type of vulnerabilities, you can see that those are not particularly sophisticated type of vulnerabilities like rowhammer attacks or return-oriented programming attacks. Those are very basic things like lack of password, lack of authentication, lack of encryption. And we may wonder why this is the case, and probably one reason is that some of those IoT devices have to be very small and very inexpensive, and security can be expensive. But we have also a lot of privacy risks, and particularly with the use of a lot of wearable devices, human body will become one of the major data sources. And of course, there is a privacy problem because a lot of this data is really health-related data, can be very private. But there is some very interesting issue concerning security itself. So yesterday, we saw a very interesting example of a smart glasses. So we'll have a lot of those devices, which like smart glasses or other type of smart contact lenses, and those devices can acquire a lot of data, as a matter of fact, as we have seen yesterday. Now, the problem is that in some cases, if you, for example, go to some organization, they'll ask you to leave your mobile phone in the entrance, because they want to make sure that you don't record anything. But with this type of wearable devices, they may have a lot of recording sensors. It will be very hard to enforce this type of policies. So it will be interesting to see, can we sense the physical environment to detect traces or hints that certain devices are recording? Because this is a major challenge. Now, industrial IoT has its own challenges. But let me show you a more interesting example, which shows the problem of privacy and safety. Now, this is a very funny example, but it is a real example. So this is a smart toy. And this smart toy is a toy which has on its back end on the cloud the IBM Watson system. So if you have seen the demo of IBM Watson, it's very smart. So you talk to Watson, it seems a real person. So they came up with this toy that can engage children. So the toy learns about the child, gets a lot of information, interacts with the children. Now, some colleagues of mine did a detailed security analysis of this toy to find out whether there were any vulnerabilities. And they found a lot of them. One important one is that the toy, while communicating with the cloud application, uses very unsecure key management. Basically, it has 14 keys which are rotated, and those are shared by all the toys. Okay? So which means if you buy one toy, you extract those keys, you can basically decrypt the data being transmitted from the other toy. This is one. This is for sure is a security and privacy issue. But what is even worse is that the device does not authenticate the person with whom the device is talking. Okay, so which means everyone can talk to the device, not only the child and his parents. Okay, but in addition, they have shown that malicious attacker can inject voice messages inside of the toy, and the toy then can ask the child to do actions. For example, a malicious attacker can inject a message which then will result in the toy asking the child, go open the door and walk out. This is an example where a security vulnerability will result in a safety problem, because again, this will endanger the life of a child. So now the key question is, we have done a lot of research in security for more than 50 years. But can we apply them to IoT? In a way, we can apply them, but we need to revisit them in many different ways. Also, when dealing with security, complexity is the enemy of security. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, our systems are becoming more complicated. So even if you look at the various network protocols, you have so many of them. And they can coexist and can be used in the same system, for example. So how do we reason about security? So here, we adopted a conventional security life cycle, and the idea being that, first of all, you have to do as much as you can to make sure your system is secure. And that's to be secure at the network level, at the application level, at all the levels. But then this may not be enough, because attackers can be very sophisticated, and some of them may really succeed in getting into your system. So which means you need to monitor continuously your system and detect anomalies and signs of attacks. Fortunately, today we have a lot of sophisticated machine learning techniques that can help with this problem. But this is not the end of it. Once you monitor and you detect some anomalies, you need to do what we call a kind of a real-time forensics analysis. So understand what is the problem. Is this the network it is jammed? As the network has a problem? Is it the sensor or the IoT devices which has been compromised? Here it's very critical that this analysis be done in real time, because with systems changing a lot, if you wait 2 hours to check what exactly happened, what is your problem, from where you have this problem, it will be too late. You won't be able to understand. And actually, the talk of yesterday on SDN shown that SDN can provide a nice support, because now we collect all the provenance, a lot of data. This may help a lot, provided that can support mobile networks and other types of protocols. But once you have done a good job, possibly in few seconds, of what is the problem in your system, then you can do a defense action. For example, you can instruct certain portions of your system to isolate themselves from the rest of your system, do rerouting of data, and so forth. Now, the more you move toward the react, recover, and fix, the more things are application dependent. Now, I'll talk a little bit about some work, but I want to mention that we have done some initial work on analyzing cellular network protocols. I want to mention this work because we really, in my research, we don't work really in network protocols, but this time we decided to kind of do some work there. It took us 1.5 years to do this work, and basically we started from the standard, and we analyzed the 3 protocols, the attach, detach, and paging protocols, to find the vulnerabilities, and we found a lot of them, actually. So, but the nice novelty of our paper, of our work, was that we wanted to use a very systematic approach. If you look how people find the vulnerabilities, sometimes they do this by hand. There is a not clear sometimes methodology. So we used 2 formal model tools for formal analysis. One is based on model checking. It's a very widely used technique. But we had to combine this model checker with a cryptographic verifier. Okay? And as a result, we found 10 new vulnerabilities, and some of them it was really, they really resulted from very trivial lack of security for certain things. Okay? But, and this was very interesting, but took us, we realized really, I appreciate how complex those protocols can be. The standard had a lot of variation, a lot of options. We don't know, for example, which variation options the vendors implement. So that was very interesting. And our work got a lot of visibility. If you want to be known in cybersecurity, if you write a paper where you show attacks on some very popular network protocol, everyone will read your paper. That's happened to us because people got very scared. They say, oh, cellular networks are not secure. Of course, some attacks we require to use a fake base stations, malicious base station, and so forth. But we found that even more sophisticated attacks related to the paging opportunity that you have in those protocols. So now, today, to finish my talk, I want just to give you a very short overview of some work we did. It's a time to, okay. Which has to do with botnet. I like this because it shows three nice things. First of all, some problems like botnets that you thought had gone away, they have come back. Second, shows that simple solutions sometimes work. And third, show another example why the lack, some problems arise because of the lack of very simple security techniques. So when people are really do such a bad job in protecting things, then it's not a surprise that you have a security attack. So let me say that this originated because a student of mine, actually 4 years ago, told me he wanted to look at this problem of botnet for IoT devices. So we did a lot of initial analysis, and we say, okay, with 90,000 IoT devices, you can mount a very strong attack. And I talked to some companies with whom I collaborate, and they told me, oh no, don't worry about those botnets, we don't care. This was 3 years ago. But then, a couple of years ago, there was this big Mirai botnet attack, which went on the media everywhere. So I was glad that we decided to start doing some work. And it was quite powerful and targeted home IoT router, surveillance cameras, and so forth. So now, but this type of system attacks are very easy to defend in a certain way. So very quickly, if we look how this attack would work, typically the first step is the one in which the attacker tries to compromise a device. This is called the brute force attack. And you say, which type of attack did they do on these IoT devices? You would have expected very sophisticated attacks. Again, there are some, if you read the security literature, which are very sophisticated. Now, this was a very trivial one. Basically, the attackers had a list of 60 login and password used by factories, and those are the default one installed on those devices. And they just took this list and tried systematically on each device. And they succeeded in compromising a lot of them. So actually, even a student of mine, we had a router, and we didn't have the password. We tried one of those and worked out very well. Okay. So this is the first thing. So it's very trivial, nothing very sophisticated. Of course, once this is done, once the bot is able to compromise, we'll install some small piece of software. Then we report that the device has been compromised to a report server, which then will communicate with the boot master. The command and control server will then instruct the loader to upload the malicious binary on the device, and finally will send an attack command. So in order to protect against this, there are 2 points. You need to prevent illegitimate users or applications which are not legitimate from entering this code, to entering this device. But also you have to prevent the device to communicate with the victim. Those are the 2 ways in which you can protect against this. And that's why we used a very simple technique, and by the way, this we can skip. But the real difficulty here is really your defense depends on the communication architecture you deal with. And in general, in IoT, there are at least 3 basic communication schemes. The first one is device to device, and 2 or more IoT devices communicate directly from each other. This is very nice. Today, there are a lot of standardization effort undergoing to allow this possibility. In most cases, really, what we notice for a lot of IoT devices, at least the ones we looked for this work, they really only communicate with an application on the cloud. So any communication is mediated by the cloud, which means this makes it very easy for us to deploy the defense because they can be deployed in some gateway. And that's basically what we did. And in this case, a very simple approach was to use a white and black list. So we really didn't need for this type of defense here to defending against botnet to deploy sophisticated machine learning algorithm, even though we are looking at some now. Just a simple white list and black list was sufficient. The reason is because those devices are very deterministic in what they do, the ones that we considered. Now, if you have complex devices which do very complex activities, then you will have to use machine learning techniques to learn their normal behavior and then being able to understand differences with respect to the normal behavior. So our technique is based on a white list-based approach, which means whenever a device connects to the IoT gateway, we will start recording the cloud, let's say the addresses with which the device is communicating. We notice that those devices, once they are connected, the first thing they do is to connect to the cloud, to their own application on the cloud. Usually they communicate with multiple IP addresses because the cloud uses load balancing to balance the load of their application. So those devices, they connect to one initially, then over time they connect to several of them. And those are typically whitelisted. However, such a naive design wouldn't work because in some cases you may get a device that when you get to your gateway has already been compromised. So it may communicate with a malicious host. So we have basically a combination of learning and checking which is always going on. So we can initially list an IP address as a in the white list, which means that this is allowed, the communication. But then we can later on switch this address to a black list if we discover that this device, that this IP address is a malicious one. And this type of simple defense would have prevented the botnet because we also control the communication, for example, attempted to log in into the device, only are from sources in the white list and not in the black. And everything else is not allowed. And so we did, we have 2 different policies, real-time validation, which means each time we have, typically we do this for DNS requests, we validate the result to this DNS query to make sure to protect against DNS poisoning attacks, or we have a real time in which we don't do this check in real time, but we have an audit process on the background. And so we have done an implementation, used the VirusTotal as a third-party security service which aggregates a lot of data from various sources. And here we have a lot of data, we have done a lot of experiments. Here, for example, is some performance about the overhead introduced by this white blacklist on the August device, which is a smart lock device. So as you can see, basically, we compare the 2 policies, maximum throughput via real-time validation, and the overhead is not much. For the real-time validation, we have an initial overhead because the first request will be validated in real time after we cache the result of this validation. But I want to conclude here and give you some more an overview of some research directions. So first of all, what we found, and we plan to do a lot of work, is to apply our methodology for the formal analysis of communication protocols to the various protocols which are used in the IoT space. As I said before, and we also plan to look into 5G, and the work is quite challenging because in a way, we wish there were formal specification of those protocols. We had to do a lot of work to encode the protocol into finite state machines with the transition diagram, because once you do that, those can be given as input to a model checking tool, which then can find whether certain properties are valid, are true in your system, or are violated. If they are violated, the system will return a counterexample. But I must say that all the attacks that we did in the 4G LTE, we implemented those attacks in our lab. So we got the equipment, really did the attacks to make sure that those attacks were really feasible. Sometimes you have attacks which are so complicated that in practice they may not be feasible. It's very important in IoT to be able to identify devices. In particular, it's very important to identify devices, identify the type of protocols they use, and their traffic pattern. So we will be looking at the way they communicate in order to identify. Finally, two important areas are protecting IoT from input spoofing. Most likely you have never heard about this specific problem, but those are a class of very challenging problems to defend us. So basically some people have shown that suppose you have an IoT device which acquires data from the environment or uses sensors to move in the environment, you can manipulate the environment so that the device stops working. A colleague of mine has taken a small drone and shown that if you have in the environment sounds with certain frequencies, those will make the gyroscope inside of the drone unable to work. This has to do with the problem that those gyroscopes have some microelectronic mechanical devices, and if you have sound which has the same frequency as the resonant frequencies inside of the gyroscope won't be able to work. This drone just falls on the ground. And there are many such cases, and those are very difficult to protect. So we hope that everyone looks for more kind of software-based solution to those problems. But those will be significant problems. And as a more, because then if you have that the environment prevents your system from working correctly, then you have a cyber-physical attack in a way. The other area is the problem of ransomware. If you have read the technical news, everyone is talking about this problem of ransomware. I remember that already 6 years ago, I wanted to work on this problem of ransomware. And a student of mine told me, Professor, I don't want to work. There are no papers on ransomware. I told him, good. That's why we should work. Sometimes you want to work, try to work on your problem. But now ransomware, since 3 years, become very kind of present in the technical media. There are solutions. The next problem will be the IoT ransomware, which means somebody can block an IoT device, for example, I hope not a pacemaker or some of these critical devices, and unless you pay, the device won't work. Typically, the ransomware we see today actually is related to taking data and files and encrypting them with some key, and then the victim has to pay in Bitcoin or some digital currency the ransom. But for IoT devices, the attacks can be aimed at different things. You don't want an IoT device, which is a part of a control system, to be blocked. That may be a real problem. So I stop here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for the nice talk. So the first question is that, will blockchain be the answer to security in IoT? And do the IoT devices will have an overhead if blockchain is using?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yes, a blockchain can provide a solution, at least not to all the problem, but can help with typical problems like managing public key encryption. Myself and other people have done some initial work, will allow to decentralize and trust better informations which are critical for security to work. Okay. Now, whether IoT devices will have impact from the use of blockchain, there are different types of blockchain technology. Some are very lightweight, and therefore they can be hosted on some of those devices. But as always with security and those devices, you have such a variety of platforms. And yesterday, the discussion suggested that in some cases you can do analytics or do sophisticated things at the edge on the device itself. In other cases, you have to move some of the work to the cloud. At the end, the overall approach may depend on your network, the bandwidth, the capacity. It's a very complex problem, but we want to be able to have systems which are self-adapting and autonomic in managing and being able to automatically offload their power, their computing tasks or not.
Thank you. So the next question is that, what do you think it should be the trade-off between leveraging personal data to provide a more accurate and personal service and user privacy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have actually, no, we could talk hours. The main problem is the following. If you ask me, is there a privacy solution that works for everything? I say no. The privacy solution really depends what you are trying to do with your data. So, for example, if you are trying just to do some statistics, then you can anonymize aggregated data. For personal use, it may depend on the accuracy of the service that you want. Some years ago, we developed an approach by which a user can be completely anonymous on a mobile phone, because we noticed that applications acquired so much data from the phones, even in cases where such data had no reason to be acquired by the application. So we came up with this idea. A user can switch, can push a button and say, I want to be anonymous. We take all the data like a contact list and copy them in a shadow file and replace this data with either null strings or fictitious data. We also, for example, replace exact location with the more larger location, but then the service that you get may not be so accurate.
Thank you. So the next question is that how to provide the identity management in IoT for so many different devices?
Okay, that's an excellent question. And actually, I try to have a student of mine work on this. And the students, I don't know why, don't like this topic, but there are a lot of standardization efforts, okay? And therefore, there will be approaches, I hope, to address that problem.
IoT is all about massive installation, which increases security threats to a large extent. What are the security guarantees IoT can provide?
Yeah. Basically, it's not that we have specific security guarantees, but it's very important to notice that because some IoT devices are cheap, actually you can have a massive redundancy, which helps a lot with security. And then you need to understand what are the security resources, where to deploy them. This will be a very important initial approach. And then you can take a decentralized approach to security, where you can have a local detection of local events, and then you can aggregate this knowledge to provide a more comprehensive view of the security posture of your IoT system. But that is an excellent area to work in.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Do you have time if I ask another question?
Yes, sure.
So, how to make a trade-off between the security and the latency of IoT devices? Do you think learning techniques can be applied?
Yeah, this is really an excellent question. Yes, learning techniques have to be applied in which you can learn. Keep in mind that security always comes with a risk estimation. So you need to at the end, a trade-off whether you want to have a high secure or more quick response times, and we need to have adaptive systems that can help to adapt to different trade-offs.
Thank you so much.
That is a good problem. Thank you.